So, I'm sure you're aware, we are due to roll out 5G by next year.
Potentially.
There's a test. Okay.
Yeah.
Shaw have stated that there's a test going to be done before the end of the year, and then we're going to be rolling it out next year.
Mm-hmm.
You're the health minister.
Yes.
What precautions, what measures have you taken to ensure the safety and health of...
Well, it actually falls within the remit of public health,
Right.
which is an independent section of the department.
Okay.
So as minister, I don't direct public health. There's actually it's in legislation. Public health is separate, so it's directed by the Director of Public Health, Henrietta Hewitt, and I know she has been monitoring it. I've seen correspondence she's copied me into in relation to what's planned to be rolled out, and also queries she's answered from several members of the public around what might be admitted, what isn't admitted from the various transmitters. Because with 5G, the way the technology works is it uses obviously the small, and I'm probably telling you to suck eggs here, but it uses the small relay transmitters.
Well, believe me, up until a month ago, I didn't.
Yeah.
But it's obviously become something that we all need to be aware of, and I would imagine.
Yeah.
It's a
So
concern
it will be
as well.
exactly the same as any other form where they will need an appropriate licence for it.
That.
So that includes within that licence what they're allowed to transmit, what they're not allowed to transmit,
Sure.
the siting, etc.
Well, in addition to that, though, these boxes that we need to put within every square metre, every square mile.
The relays.
Yeah, which is going to mean over 200.
Yes, it is.
50 boxes on the island.
Yeah.
Apart from them being a ridiculously much stronger.
Well, my understanding is it's not.
35 times as strong.
My
as
understanding
4G.
is it's not from the transmitters, because 4G doesn't use relays. 4G actually uses full-on transmitters.
Yeah.
Whereas 5G uses micro
We're talking about
relays.
the micro waves, if you like, the micro.
Yeah.
The difference in the frequency.
Because the stuff I've seen, because I've been given scientific papers as well, where there's obviously been research done in
that's
the
kind
UK.
of all I'm here for today, to be honest with you, is for you to direct me to the information.
Well, if you give me 1 second,
Dr. Goodman
if
says.
you've got an email address, because it should still be on this iPad. I can send you the stuff that Henrietta Hewitt sent me.
Well, there's a Facebook page being set up on there. Can you post it to that?
Probably not. It's quite large, so it's an actual physical document.
Okay.
So I'd have to send it via email.
Sure.
Let me see if I can. If it's not on the iPad, I can get it from the desktop.
And you're aware that the likes of, I mean, as far as I'm aware, there's maybe 2 states in America that have got this up and running. Apart from that, the rest of the world.
Well, there's been trials in Europe as well in relation in terms of a full rollout. There's certain states in America.
Yeah.
I think there's. I might be wrong on this, but I think there's one of the. Well, they call them states, but it's more like regions in Australia as well. I think has.
Well, yeah, but Sydney, for instance, they've just revoked their licences and decided that it's not a good idea, as Brussels.
Well, I'm not aware of that.
Well, did you know that Israel, who are the people that are claiming responsibility for this next revolution of technology, they've admitted that they don't know enough, and they are holding back on releasing this rollout too. Did you know that?
Well, I've heard there's certain areas of the world that are reassessing, because the thing with 5G is what you will find is there's no one set model as to how it's rolled out. It's from a technological point of view, because I've looked into the technology around 5G, it's still fluid. So, for instance, you mentioned America. What is called a 5G network in one particular state, and how that's rolled out and transmitted, is different to the way it's rolled out transmitted in another. And that's one of the interesting issues about the technology. Whereas with 4G...
Or suspicious?
Well, no, I think it's interesting because it's the way it's evolving, and I think because the reason is that if you looked at 3G, for instance, where the way it all started moving. So you had 2G, where it was very clearly defined what it needed to deliver. 3G as well, very clearly defined what it needed to deliver in terms of technological ability. 4G had a similar situation when that first came out, where it was several years of people tinkering around before a standard was set as to what it needed to deliver from a technological point of view. So again, what was being termed 4G networks, so for instance 4G, Japan was one of the first countries and is credited as being one of the first countries to roll out 4G. But if you actually compare what the 4G rollout in Europe was compared to the rollout in Japan, it's very, very different from a technological point of view as to what it was physically delivering. And this is what's happening with 5G, where there's a sort of an argument around what the standard is.
I understand the scenario, the way that this is happening, but in actual fact 5G is a very different thing from 4G.
No, it is, and that's I think that's exactly why there's that argument over what criteria, because for instance if you read some of the scientific papers and also some of the technological papers, you would find that a lot of people are arguing that a lot of what the 5G networks that are up now aren't actually technically 5G, they're 4.5G, because they're saying, well, actually in terms of what it can deliver from a technological point of view, in terms of people accessing the network, the relay time backwards and forwards via the networks, it doesn't actually deliver what they believe should be the set standard for access on a 5G network.
Well, as you say, this is a variable, isn't it?
It's a variable. So at the moment, it's still up in the air. I've found actually the bits.
Returning to my original question.
Yeah.
What has the Manx government put in place?
Well, it'll be monitored by public health.
So it's going to be rolled out and monitored.
So it'll be monitored in the same way. In the same way we do with all these things.
There's no independent studies being done that prove that there aren't any health risks then?
Well, no, we feed into other independent. So, for instance, like I say, I'm happy to email this to you, the detailed replies that Henry Hewitt has given.
It's a very long file, but
and there's also links as well.
Can you not answer that question? Are there things in place to reassure the public that there's no health risks?
Well, yes, because we do exactly the same as we did with 3G and 4G rollout, where we look at the international studies.
That neither of those are actually the same as 5G.
Yeah, but we look at the international assessments. We look at the health organisations around the world that monitor 5G, and we take advice from that.
So you've taken.
I mean, the Isle of Man, as a small jurisdiction, is not going to be able to launch our own studies. So what we do is we feed in with the World Health Organization, organisations like that.
Are we a member of the ITU?
I think we are. Okay. I think we do receive input from them.
Did you know that there's been over 240 reports by the UN?
Mm-hmm. Yes, there's been lots of reports, but some of them with differing results, I believe.
Well, differing results, but they're also being funded by different people. 80% of which are the people that are instigating these rollouts.
Yeah, but like I say, we look to the actual health authorities as well. So we'll feed into the UK, we feed into their reports, we feed into the international reports. So that all comes in for consideration. So
we're reliant on countries outside
of the
Isle of Man.
To be frank, for everything that we do public health-wise.
Do you think that's a healthy thing?
Well, yeah, because I mean we're a population of 84,000. We'd bankrupt the Department of Health if we had to
maybe we don't
do our
it
own.
Then.
So, well, no, we need to do it. I mean, from public health point of view,
in your opinion, but in your opinion,
risks to the public.
China, for instance, Huawei. That's a huge Chinese.
Oh yes, yeah.
Tender, I would imagine, involved in our 5G. You'd be content with taking their research and their findings?
Well, again, we'd have to assess. Well, it's normally not individual countries we look at. It's international organisations.
Well, if we're a member of ITU, there's 800 countries and
but what I mean is, but we look at high-level reports from those organisations. So we don't necessarily turn around and say the French government has done this, the Chinese government has done this, because obviously they're looking at it from their own personal point of view. So we'd look at what the reports we'd look at are things like the World Health Organization, that is looking at it from a more broad point of view, rather than looking at it from a nationalist individual country point of view,
Right.
if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense.
So rather than...
So who are we going to have to assess the assessments then?
Or public health.
So, and this is the independent body you talked about
Yes, yeah,
before.
which sits within the Department of Health and Social Care.
So who funds them?
So it's funded by Isle of Man government, so it's part of the budget of DHSC,
Right.
but they operate independently within the department.
And they're
So we have a
answerable
director.
to...
So we have the director of public health. Ultimately, they're answerable to Timwood.
Right.
So we have a director of public health who's
So
appointed.
do we have information that will prove before we roll this out that it's safe to us then? Is that what you're saying? This independent
Yeah,
body
there will be an
will
assessment. There will be an assessment by public health
Right.
as to whether or not they believe that it's safe to do so. The same as we do with any form of technology that gets rolled out on the island. There is always an assessment done as to whether they believe, and if they have any doubts or belief that there is a risk to public safety, then obviously it will be prevented from being rolled out.
Okay. Well, will the public have access to that information as well?
Yes, yeah. All public health stuff is accessible publicly.
Just trying to get them involved, see it. That's as today. It's just shocking.
So like I say, I can send you all the stuff that public health's put out so far in relation to 5G. Along with
So we have got
links.
some
I'm happy to
information
share it.
about...
Well, I've just told you,
Right,
the Director
okay.
of Public Health
Yeah,
has
sure.
responded to
be honest,
because you're not the first, obviously. Obviously, there's been several members of the public who want to know about the risks and the way the 5G would work, what impact it may have. And so the Director of Public Health has replied to several individuals over this.
We're just taking that one source of information, nothing that might contradict it.
Well, no. What I mean, public health will consider health studies from around the world.
Yeah.
So
they're
we're
going
not
to consider...
taking one source.
Okay.
So we don't just you don't just take one set of reports and
Maybe
say.
I'm phrasing this the wrong way then, but who is watching the watchers? This independent body, they get to choose all of the reports that have been done, or do they just choose certain ones?
No, they will look at a broad base of research
Based on what?
on what's available internationally.
So all of it then?
Yeah, basically.
So they'll... Right.
They'll pull from multiple sources across the board. So they don't just go to one organisation or one source. They will look across the board in relation to, as public health does with all things like vaccines as well, when they look at child mortality risks, things like that. That's all done from multiple sources internationally. It's not just done from one set source.
I'm interested then. How there's information out there that is saying there's evidence, and as I say, the UN, these 240 odd scientists, neurologists, they're all concerned that, particularly you mentioned child mortality.
But equally there's evidence on the other side as well.
Well,
that's where there needs to be a balance. As with all these things, you will find reports on both sides of the argument.
And that's what I asked.
And that's why then what has to happen is that all has to be combined up and looked at as one, and then public health has to make an assessment, an informed assessment across all those reports to decide where they feel the risk lies.
So therein lies my... that'd be
and that's exactly the same way it works in the UK as well, but on a much larger scale with their public health, where the UK won't just take their own evidence, they look internationally, and the same with most jurisdictions. European jurisdictions, I should say. America's slightly different, but they will normally take a wide base around the world, various reports from various organisations, normally from accredited, recognised organisations.
I guess what I'm trying to get across here is that even if there's one report to say that our children are at risk,
that would be considered.
Isn't that enough to stop it?
Well, no, not necessarily, because it depends upon the evidence base of that report. So, for instance, I really need to share with you some of the stuff that the Director of Public Health's already sent out. So, for instance, there's a report out there that is factually incorrect and has been proven to be factually incorrect. And the Director of Public Health lays out in one of these responses, statement by statement, proven
Director
why.
Of Public Health.
No, by other reports, that have gone through
And herein lies my problem I'm trying to get across to you, is that we're diluting our responsibility all the way along the way.
Well, no, we're not.
Sorry, can I,
Yeah.
just make the point, which is that, you know, there's somebody answerable to somebody further and further down the line, and all that seems to be happening is the waters are being muddied, rather than getting any clear distinction of, you say one report's being closed down, and it's not at risk, but there's 240, 80% of those 240 reports from the UN that are stating that there are potential
Yeah, but
risks.
equally there's more, you know,
There-
putting a
it
number
isn't
on,
equal.
there's hundreds of
I wouldn't
reports
say
saying
that,
there isn't.
I wouldn't say it was equal, and believe me, I've done
Yeah.
my own research into this stuff, and and just so you know, more on the case of trying to convince myself that we're okay,
Yeah,
rather than scaremongering.
Yeah.
Because that's not what I'm about. What I'm
Yeah.
about is making sure that these potential risks that a lot of people now are bringing up, and as I say,
and that's also
can I please?
sorry.
Thanks. The Prime Minister of Belgium, for instance, has said that she won't treat her subjects as guinea pigs based on these reports. So what I'm trying to get across here, if she's seen a report that suggests to her that she might be making guinea pigs out of these people, is that not enough in itself to air caution around this?
Well, no, it's not, because it depends. When 3G, for instance, came out, there was certain countries that turned around and said they weren't going to implement 3G. They waited to see how it went.
And that's kind of my point.
And
really,
since
is
then,
that-
they have
that's-
rolled it out.
That idea is what seems to be going on. You've got Israel, all these people that have decided that they're not going to roll it out, and we seem to be plodding on with it and getting on with it. What I want to know, and what I want you to convince the public of, is that we're not going to be the guinea pigs for the rest of the world on this.
Well, we're not the guinea pigs for a start, because, like I say, anything we do roll out, it's not an instant rollout. There would have to be trials, etc., which are monitored
happening this year.
which are monitored very, very closely to see what the effects of them are.
It's a good point you bring up, because I've been interested in wondering how by the end of this year we'll have been testing it, and then we'll roll it out next year. But the evidence being provided by these people suggests that it isn't an immediate thing. It's not going to fry everybody's brain, everybody's going to fall over it. It may take years for this thing to become apparent. But we're going to roll it out within a year, maybe 18 months.
Well, that's not actually what's been stated so far.
It's what's been stated by Shaw.
That's what they're potentially looking to do.
Well,
it's not, you know.
I read it again last
They've obviously
night,
got to get the
and
license
you can
in
see it on
place. They've got to
Facebook.
get agreement.
That's how they've suggested it's going to happen.
And like I say, that would come down to then public health making an informed judgment by looking at the evidence from elsewhere, whether or not they believe it's safe to do so. In the same way that we do for any things. I mean, it's like when I'll give you another example from health.
Before you do, and we move on again, my point is that, do you think a test that may be anywhere between 6 and 12 months is going to be sufficient to provide the evidence that long-term effects will be prevented?
Well, to be perfectly blunt, with long-term effects, by their very nature, they're long-term. Now, if you turn around, you'd never do anything in that case, because
maybe
if you turn around and
extend
say...
the test, the amount of time that you're testing this.
Well, in theory, once things are rolled out, they're in permanent test anyway, because they continue to be monitored. So the 4G network, etc.,
So
and the
we
way
are
things work...
potentially rolling this out, and it will be an ongoing test. Is that
it's more... So, for instance, 4G, that's been out for how many years now? About 10 years, is it, 4G? 4G is still continuously monitored. So the whole role of public health is that they monitor long-term trends.
Actually, seeing as you brought it up, there's becoming growing evidence to suggest that 4G may be detrimental to us as well.
Well, again, the evidence base, with all due respect, is mixed on that.
Well,
There's certain reports that are trying to assign
and with all
health
respect,
conditions.
that's exactly what I'd expect you to say.
Well, it's true.
It's a balanced.
It's a balanced.
It's also a balanced opinion that I have. But there is, what I'm saying to you is, and this is what it all comes down to, who's making that decision when we've got evidence to suggest that there may be something that is a risk to our health, there's also evidence that suggests that it's all okay. But even with 4G, we're still monitoring, we're still testing, so we still don't know for sure that there aren't any long-term
No,
effects.
that's not why.
That's what you just said.
No, what we do is we always continuously monitor. It's a generalised thing. Telecommunication networks.
Sorry, I said to you, so we're in effect still testing it, and you agreed.
No, we're monitoring it. There's a difference between testing and monitoring. I'm sorry to be pedantic, but there is a big difference. A test is where basically you're actually getting the evidence to decide, do you roll it out fully. A monitoring is monitoring an ongoing situation after the fact. Yeah. So 4G, for instance, is still monitored. That's why we have a public health directorate.
Well, again,
it's the same with the child vaccines, everything like that, adult vaccines, medicinal products. You know, just because they come out of trial and become available doesn't mean
it only makes
the
sense
monitoring
that we
stops.
keep an eye on this stuff,
Yeah.
which is why I've said.
So, for instance,
that
NICE in the UK.
the evidence that is now coming out from 4G on the long-term effects, that there may be some risks to our health are coming out now. So we did tests and they weren't sufficient because there is possible risk to our health at a later date. And we've monitored that.
Well, again, I must say the evidence is mixed.
Okay, but there's some evidence that
and
there is a potential risk.
And it's
so what I'm trying to say is, before you decide that we're going to test 5G, and then we're going to implement it and we're going to roll it out, and then we'll monitor it to see that it isn't risking anybody's health. What are you going to do before we get to that point?
Well, like I say, that's why
those people that suffer from all these diseases and everything else we're talking about.
But that's why we have an independent directorate of public health that looks at the evidence from around the world, brings in evidence from the best sources, some that will say one thing, some that will say that maybe even the polar opposite. And then an informed assessment has to be made by those professionals in public health as to whether they believe there is a public health risk. And they then will act accordingly. So if public health is satisfied that on the basis of the evidence they have, that it does not pose a genuine risk to the public, then their position from the Public Health Directorate will be that it is safe to roll out. If after going through the international evidence and the evidence that's available, like I say, mixed, some of which will be polar opposite to the other, they come to the balanced view that there is a public health risk, then they would oppose the rollout. And that's why we have an independent directorate of public health, because what you don't want is people such as myself, politicians, making that decision.
No, absolutely not.
You know, that is the last thing that you want, because then it becomes a political matter. And that's why we have that, although the Directorate of Public Health is within the Department of Health and Social Care, it is an arm's length division of the department. So there's no political pressure applied to public health. They purely, as professionals, look at the evidence base. If necessary, they bring in resource from outside to look at things if they feel they're not competent or they haven't got the ability to look at it in detail. And that from that, they make an informed professional assessment themselves as to what they believe should and shouldn't proceed.
And then Kinmold makes a decision based on that information?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Which, I guess, that's the only proper way to do it.
And I mean, and we are lucky in the fact that our public health is completely independent, because there is countries around the world where public health literally is a division, within a government department, but with political direction.
Okay, so I guess, and my point being that I'm not convinced of their what's the word I'm looking for? Motivation, is it? These people are going to be given this information and then.
Well, they will source the information themselves. They don't wait for it. They don't wait to be given it. They will go and source the information,
and somebody will give it.
Yeah. Well, ultimately an organisation, but they will. I mean, most of the stuff is online anyway. As you've said yourself, you've accessed a lot of the different reports available.
And would mean to me that if all things being equal, that it's not going to get rolled out from what I've seen.
Well, like I say, that's a decision for public health directorate,
I know. And this is my
their professional
opinion. What I'm trying to get
Yeah.
to is making sure that these people are going to make a very good, informed decision on this stuff.
That's why they're public health professionals. That's what their career
So we're in their
is.
hands.
That's what their job is.
So we're in their hands, basically, aren't we?
Yeah, and quite rightly so, because what you want, like I say, is an informed decision by public health professionals, and not politicians like me.
So what?
That are
So
interested
I guess
in
what
other
I need
aspects as
is
well.
convincing that these guys are working in our interest.
But I mean, I think I think it's a bit unfair to suggest public health wouldn't be. I mean, like I say,
No,
they're
that's
an
not what I
independent.
did.
Yeah,
I didn't say
but
that. I didn't
they're-
suggest that at all.
Apologies, Eddie. It's just the way it seemed to come across.
No. What I'm rephrasing, if you
Yeah.
like. What I'm asking you is, what is there to convince me that these people that are going to do the research on our behalf and make their proposals to Tynwald, how do I convince myself that they're getting the right information?
Well, one of the things what I can do is I can put you in contact with the Director of Public Health,
Right.
and you can have a conversation with her.
That'd be cool.
And we'll see if we can, that's not a problem at all. If you've got an email address or anything like that you can give me, then I'll pass it on to Henrietta, and Henrietta's very, very amiable to have
Henrietta
conversations.
Hewitt,
Hewitt, yeah.
Right, because I'm just going to...